Over John Frausto with Topspin Tennis special podcast today. We've got Chuck Tomlin from Congruent Tennis is joining us tonight on the podcast. We've had him on it before, and we've got some really, really interesting topics tonight. We're going to discuss topspin. We're going to look into the power fade, and also he and John Carpenter have a really special book coming out soon on modern tennis instruction that we want to discuss as well. Might get into the Topspin Pro, one of the great teaching aid as well. But I'd like to welcome Chuck Tomlin. How you doing, Chuck?
Doing very good. Really glad to catch up with you again.
Yeah, yeah. As always, we've been very fortunate to be able to train by you and John down in Atlanta, and
Yeah, look,
always look forward to it and your expertise and CTM and just having a different perspective on tennis instruction. This um, higher resolution as you guys discussed. So I think it's really neat. So thanks for being on the podcast. Let's dive right into it. Let's talk about topspin and some of the myths with topspin. Hitting from 6 to 12. Share with the audience some of your thoughts on topspin and someone that's teaching to hit from 6 o'clock to 12 o'clock, how that could be misinformation or, not giving the right guidance to the student.
yes, I think it's a really important thing to understand that, because it seems like I think a lot of people realize that sometimes you're going to have a little more spin to the right. We'll talk about a right hand to forehand, use that as our default if you don't mind. And, so you can spin it around the right, like I guess when Nadal does it, it's the left, but you get the point of when he does that banana shot where he gets around and he draws the ball back in or hooks it back into the court. People realize that you can do that. And a lot of times people realize that you can go off the inside and fade the ball a little bit, even though those terms are new to tennis. But I think most people think, but it's fine to go ahead and hit straight over the top as well. And I think that the most important thing about learning the fade and draw is to learn that you should endeavor to never hit over the top. Now, if it ends up happening by accident, it's fine. If it's not a bad thing to go over the top. But what is a bad thing, in my strong opinion, and studied opinion, and I've got a lot of time and experience with this, is to intend to hit 6 o'clock to 12 o'clock straight over the top. And there's a couple of reasons for it. So the first and most important one, I think, is that it spoils the swing. If I do an example with the kids, and I'll take the racket and I'll come out and I'll swing across. Come out to the ball and swing across. Which, if you swing across like that as you make contact, you're going to get some diagonal nature. Some people call it side spin.
Mm-hmm.
We like to call it diagonal top spin because all these are versions of top spin. And if you do like this, you can show with the racket that it's no trouble at all to get that like swishing sound of acceleration with the racket.
Right.
But I don't think there's anybody who can come out here and swing on a straight line down the target line, extend out over the top, 12 o'clock directly over the top, and make that acceleration sound with your racket. So it's
Yeah.
effortless to accelerate the racket like that as you work across.
It's interesting.
Um,
Not to interrupt, but
no, go ahead.
you talk about spoiling the swing, which I love because anatomically, like you said, right? So we go to the ball and we pull up and across. If you try to go 6 to 12 with that racket, that's where you become disconnected, and anatomically, you just can't hit a ball optimally.
You said it very well. That's
Yeah,
exactly right. If you get to us, you want to swing somewhat direct. I don't like to think of it as straight line linear, but you swing fairly direct out near the ball. As you swing out to find and meet the ball, as you get close to it, and if you're hitting out front nicely, about the time that you're really near impact is about time to now go and start working across. Now, you can work a lot across if you want a lot of spin, and a lot of shape on the ball, or you can go less across, which a lot of people would think is very directly through the ball, but it's still a cross.
yeah,
It's still a certain amount of cross because you have now, like you said, anatomically, you've run out of the ability to go forward with a good, quick, and accelerating swing.
Forward
And
and
so,
forward and vertically as well. Correct.
right. You just
Yeah.
run out of real estate, so to speak. You run out of
That's
juice.
real estate. So the thing I love about when you and I mean, besides these Zoom meetings, we'll just get together on the phone and we'll talk shop, which I always love doing.
Right.
But
Right.
let me ask you this, because this wasn't on the agenda for tonight, but let's talk about acceleration and
Oh yeah.
CTM. So Oscar Wagner, um, talked about like just trying to find the ball with the hand, and true power, doesn't it really come from the acceleration and that timing of the racket? How does CTM work with the forehand or any stroke as far as accelerating and finding that ball, and then pulling up and across or through and up and across?
Well, we handle it very similar to how Oscar did with modern tennis. With congruent tennis, we take that same basic model and just expand on it. We just go, as we say, we seek to get a higher resolution. There was a lot of things at MTM that I think were just sort of, what would you say, glossed over, a little bit
Right.
blurry, and we try to bring some resolution to those items, bring a higher resolution and understand that, um, that why you accelerate, and also I think in MTM there was we added an idea called dual objectives. That sounds like we're running off in another area here, but
Yeah.
you can't really sort of discuss this stuff with a higher resolution without understanding that there's sort of dual objectives here. In other words, there's two things at play. We have the acceleration, which is very important, but there's a huge factor of racket head speed. We're not throwing that out the window. We're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You have to come with a certain amount of racket head speed and then add to that with acceleration. So racket head speed has its place. In other words, you need a certain amount, a certain modicum of racket head speed, and then you can actually, by accelerating across, you can multiply that. It's
Right.
a multiplier. So the acceleration is the key feature of getting the proper momentum and racket head speed into the contact.
Right.
So without that change of direction, as Oscar used to say, without that change of direction and that acceleration, you're gonna, as we were talking about before, you're gonna run out of racket head speed. You're gonna end up pushing the ball, and you're not gonna have the same kind of force. And that's what we're talking about. We talk about accelerations, mass times acceleration equals force. So sure, force is not, some people will argue physics of it and say that force is not the determining factor. Well, it may not, nothing is the end all and be all, but, it's both power produced as well as force produced. We want the dual objectives of creating both of those into impact to get the best results.
Right. Right.
I'm no physics expert, so I don't know all those details, but I mean, I think even common sense tells you that if you can accelerate into contact, I mean, everybody has experienced different types of collisions. Like, I was a football player growing up, and I know that if I could, when a tackler was coming in, he was trying to accelerate into me to make the hit. If I could change the direction a little bit and then accelerate into him, I could dominate that collision and many times avoid the tackle. So same thing, if we can take that racket, change direction, accelerate into the ball on an oblique, we can dominate the collision and get the certain results that we're seeking.
Right. Right. Good point. Good point. Going back to that top spin, 6 to 12. So we discussed that it's truly not, you're spoiling the stroke, 6 to 12. What are we doing off a high ball then? And we'll get into this. This kind of gets into the fade, the power fade, but a ball, let's do this. Let's look at different hitting heights. Okay. So let's say a dropping ball below the waist. Okay. How are
All
you
right.
approaching that ball as far as trying to spin it? How would a player approach that with CTM?
Well, if you have a dropping ball, it really, if you think about it just a bit, it makes a lot of common sense that if the ball is dropping in one plane, and if our racket swing can be matching that plane, even though you're coming from the opposite direction, but the more we match that plane, the more we can manage the contact real cleanly. And it's like one of those adages in tennis that you'll hear a lot of times: "Where's the easiest place to hit the ball? Where it came from."
Mhm.
Okay, well, that also deals with these this plane here. So if it came from high and it's coming to lower because it's dropping, then for our racket, come low to high, hit it back where it came from to now take that dropping ball and lift it back up where it came from is the most consistent plane of action for it. And you're
Right.
going to be able to be very consistent. And it also allows you to impart much more spin when you do it that way. You're using that dropping action to catch it and whip the spin onto it a little bit stronger.
Right.
So,
No, I
big
always,
mistake that you often see is you see somebody, they get a sitter, easy ball, and it's dropping. They wait for it to come down in their hitting zone, and then the ball's dropping pretty quick, and they're swinging very horizontal to try to really smack it. And that is a very tough shot to make. It's
right.
sort of the equivalent of trying to change the direction of the ball in a radical way. You know how we're all familiar with like changing the direction of a ball, a cross court ball, to try to go down the line, and how easy it is to lose control of that. Well, the same thing applies on a dropping ball. If it's dropping steeply and you're swinging very horizontal to try to really drive that ball, you have that same issue of changing the direction of the ball, and it's
Right.
hard to control.
Right. Okay, so we've got that ball, we got a dropping ball, and I love this, by the way, because it does really give you this action plan. Like, okay, I've got a dropping ball. What am I going to do with this? You call it like the lift and spin,
Right.
um, which is brilliant, right? Because you have a game plan with a different with the incoming ball. What about a rising ball? You're taking the ball, and it's a rising ball. You're taking it early. How's that affected with top spin? How do you hit that ball?
Okay, so we're gonna apply the same logic, right? So now we've got a ball that's, instead of dropping through our hitting zone, it's rising up through the hitting zone. And the closest we can come to matching that would be coming in with a very level swing. So the level driving swing is going to be the best, and especially if it's nearing the apex. Because if it's nearing the apex, it's almost turning into the horizontal ball, slowly turning into it as it reaches near the apex. And that's a great place to use a level driving swing, and then slightly, just ever so slightly, closing the racket face.
Yes.
Uh,
To kind of
to
match the incoming ball that wants to rise and kind of carry them. It wants to carry them, off the racket high. So a slightly closed
right.
face with a
So
level, more of a low to level swing path is
right.
ideal.
And you're closing the racket because if you think about it, the ball's rising within the racket to be perpendicular to it,
Yep.
back where it came from, the racket has to be closed just a little bit. But we can't swing down because we just hit it in the net since we play with the net. I mean, the easiest thing to do would be to take that rising ball and slam it right back down where it came from.
Yep.
That's just not very productive because we have to get it over a net. So we
Right.
have to, on that one, and we're not too limited. For the rising ball, we can lift as much as we want, so we're not limited there. But for the rising ball, we can't just hit as low as we want. So we have to compromise a little bit there and use that energy to drive it out fairly horizontally, very level swing, horizontal shot, driving the ball in general.
What are your thoughts? I remember Andre Agassi had a quote, like he said, "I hit the ball when it stops." And basically what he meant is, to your point, that you hit the ball when it gets to its apex, where it almost looks like it's no longer rising vertically. Do you teach any of
That's
that in CTM, or is that any type of tactic or something you use?
Well, we definitely teach several things about the apex. And I think it's a little bit of an illusion, but hey, we can use these illusions to our benefit. I mean, the ball doesn't really stop, but yet because it stopped rising, at the apex, and now it's starting to drop, there is just that tiny. In fact, they even call it a dropping ball illusion. I think there's a scientific name for it, um, there's that period of time where it sort of levels out, still moving, ball's still moving well, but it's not contrasting with in verticality. It's not rising, it's not dropping as much. It's sort of peaking and becomes very horizontal at that point, and that makes a nice place. If that's within your strike zone, that's a really nice place to take the ball. You know, and that's one of the things about CTM that really I think we do to help players is, in the past, players really only got to take advantage of that for the most part, something between their rib cage and their waist. If a ball peaked at, so lower bouncing balls, players were really, they could be a beast just sitting in there slamming hard, flat driving balls. But one of the best tactics in tennis was to get the ball to bounce up out of your strike zone. So if you don't understand how to handle the rising ball or the high ball with a fade, if you don't know how to swing horizontally, slightly closing the face, and working off the inside of the ball to gain control of it, you're not going to be able to handle those high bouncing balls. But with CTM, we teach how to do that, which allows you to do several things. I mean, that allows us to use the apex of the bounce, that height of the bounce, a lot more effectively. It allows us to move in and take balls way earlier that a player normally would have to sit back 2, 3, 8 feet further back to wait for it to come back down into the strike zone. We don't have to do that. In fact, our preference is to step in, 6 or 8 feet, take it at shoulder height. Now we got the advantages of being closer to the net. Contact point that's well above the net allows us to be very aggressive and forceful with the ground strokes.
Love
It's
it.
actually the situation we're looking to create is a situation that, traditionally most players really hadn't had an answer for. But yet that's what in CTM, we're looking for every opportunity to do that. And it's the easiest and best shot in the game.
Yeah, that's a great point. I had a colleague of mine actually uh, questioning the fade and the draw. We haven't talked about the draw, but saying like, is there any not evidence, but just did it make sense to him? Like, I can't believe like a draw and a fade, it's just topspin and slice. And I'm like, well, think about it in golf. The best golfers can draw the ball, they can fade the ball, they work off different sides of the ball to make it, move. Same thing in bowling, right? You can kind of draw the ball in bowling. That's how you actually get more control.
Yeah.
CTM addresses the draw and the fade. It makes sense, but I think it's this higher resolution that some people just can't understand.
Well, and part of that is because of the way tennis is viewed. Generally people are watching it from the side of the court. You got no sense of it for the
Exactly.
most part from the side. One of the things I do, one of the first things I do to a skeptic is offer them I send them some video of court level tennis. When you're down at court level and behind the players, it's just shocking. Even me, who was working with this 4 or 5 years before I really got some great video of this, I was even shocked at how often and how much the players were drawing the ball. The fades, you don't see it as much. They hit the fade shot. Really, when I say fade, or draw, I'm always talking about the nature of the spin. You may or may not get a whole lot of actual bending of the balls, curving of the ball, and you don't get a ton of it on fades because the ball is so powerful. I mean, it's sort of like there's a reason that when you watch baseball and you see the curve balls at 82 miles an hour, which is pretty standard, there's a reason they throw it at 82 because at 82, that's where they can really get the ball to break
Mm-hmm.
before before the plate. If they throw that same ball at 90 miles an hour, they're capable probably of throwing it 90 and getting good spin on the ball, but it won't break before the plate, right? So the same thing, power fade, we're actually driving the ball maybe 10, 20 miles an hour faster than a draw in most cases. And so when you're pumping up the power like that, it's going to be a lot less evidence of that fade spin. Now the spin is there. And the main point of that spin is it provides horizontal control. And that was the other thing that the other point, we talked about how if you don't swing across the ball and accelerate properly, you're not going to you're not going to have a quality swing. You're going to spoil the swing. Well, the other second part of that is if you're not working across the ball in that horizontal accelerating nature, you're also not going to have that good trajectory control. And probably the most important aspect of fitness is how to control that trajectory. I like to make the comment was like, yeah, you can hit high over the net with a lot of spin, but at a certain point, you hit so high over the net with power, doesn't matter how much spin you have, it's going to go out almost, if you're hitting too high. So trajectory, bringing that ball down into the court trajectory plays a huge role in that, especially at different speeds. I mean, obviously, the harder you're hitting, you're going to have to bring down the trajectory, and net clearance has got to be less.
Right.
So a
I think
big key.
too, one thing too, we talked about this, and I had mentioned this to you in when we were in Atlanta, and then I played college tennis, and I could not put a ball away like this mid-court attack that you talk about. I was not good at. I did not understand it. If I would have known this back in the day, I felt like I could have won so many more matches. But what the one concept too I want people to understand is when you're hitting this power fade and the ball is above your shoulders, the racket head is technically above the hand, correct?
Exactly, definitely. I almost think about it like the hands of a clock. I mean, if
Yes.
you look at it, your core right in here is sort of like the center of the clock, and as the ball goes higher, the clock hand goes higher, right? And so is the racket. The racket face is going to go higher. Yeah, I
Right.
probably got a racket in here handy.
Yep.
Uh,
Nice Yonex plug, by the way.
yeah, and then
I
I
think
pull
we
out a
know.
head racket. But anyway, I had to grab
Yeah.
what was handy.
Yep.
Uh, so if my racket, if I'm swinging up for a higher ball, then my arm should be higher. Now it goes down a little bit because of the bend in my arm. I don't swing with a straight arm. If I did swing with a straight arm, it'd be more like this. But I use a bent arm forehand, and so the racket head is going to be. You can see the racket tip is going to be can be very high, and the higher I have to hit the ball, the higher
Right.
it's going to go. And then just the opposite true of a lower ball. The racket tip's going to drop lower than the 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock for different contact heights.
Yep. And what was interesting too, that you had pointed out that even on this power fade, a higher ball, racket heads above the hand, right?
Right?
You still have to get that ball. If you call it like the higher, like a higher slot or a second slot, where the racket head still does come below the ball on that power fade, correct? It's not like we're
Absolutely.
hitting, it's not like we're hitting down on a rising ball like that. We're really
And
still got to get below the ball a little bit with that racket head, correct?
on the more horizontal swings, I know people are not really fond of calling that as a low to high swing, but it still needs to be if you're hitting topspin and you're back a little bit at least, behind the service line or so, most likely you need to be swinging a little bit low to high. Now there
Yeah.
are exceptions. If you're inside the service line and
Yeah.
you've got something like you know, 3 feet over the net, you can hit down into the court. And so in that case, you might actually be swinging high to low, like almost like a slice, still hitting topspin. So there
Right.
are exceptions, but assuming you're, behind the service line significantly and the ball is a reasonable height, you're generally for almost all, like if you look at almost every inside out forehand where the guy hits or gal, it hits a really nice forehand. We'll talk about a fade drive, inside out. They hit that fade drive. There's always just a slight lift, so you got two things. You got the lifting of the racket that creates, that's how you get that top spin, that diagonal top spin.
Right.
It spins off the inside. So yes, you're still gonna now on the lift and spins where you're drawing the ball and you're reaching down lower for your contact, then there's going to be a much more substantial low to high for those.
Right. Right. I agree with you. Like, I think tennis on TV does an injustice to really show you the shape, and the net clearance and the spins that these players are hitting. So I would encourage everybody to go on YouTube and just watch, Alcaraz, Nadal, Federer, court view, rear, like from the behind, not the side. And then you can really start seeing how these guys and gals can manipulate the ball and work in the different
Yeah.
lanes and work with the different spins and the different shapes.
Now, I don't think most of those guys are thinking about it quite the same way. I think they would benefit from thinking about it the way we do. I think that most of those guys have hit thousands of balls in thousands, and like, well, maybe in tens or 20s ways, a lot of different scenarios. And they figured out this is how I hit this ball in this scenario. And so they've worked on things until they found something that worked very good for them. And so they just they repeat things based on the context of the ball, and they face these different contexts, or situational things. They faced them over and over, and so they figure out what they can do in those situations. You also see these pros very often get a little confused when they're in an odd, if they're in an odd context or an odd situation that they haven't faced very often and don't have the answer worked out. That's where you'll see even pros just really botch a shot, or because they'll just be lost for a second. Like, what do I do with this? In other words, they're a little bit like a club player for a minute on that one contact, because it's just not a shot that they routinely face, and they haven't worked out how to handle it. It's rare, but it does happen. And I think that's one of many things that's in a value of thinking about it our way. Because if you look at it the way we approach it at Congruent Tennis, and you have this sort of set of guidelines, I don't like to call them rules because they're guidelines. They give you guidance on how you might approach a different ball. Um, and you're not going to run across something you don't know what to do with, because every ball situation is basically covered, with these guidelines. And so when you're running up to face an awkward or odd situation, you can instantly figure it out, because you can say, oh, okay, that ball's dropping and it's lower contact. So I'm going to need to lift and spin that. It's going to be my most consistent uh, executable shot.
Right, right. No, that's a good point. And it is amazing because you do. I mean, it does take a lot of repetition. Let's not say we can't just take CTM and go out and you're going to master it right away. It does take a lot of reps and the understanding of the concept. But just having that knowledge and knowing now, like, oh, I've got this ball. This is what I'm gonna, I can do this with it. It is empowering to know, that there are
And it's
options and there's a
and
certain.
it's probably literally 20 times as fast to learn the different scenarios as opposed to, say, a pro. That's why it takes 10 years for somebody to develop to be such a good player. They have to hit so many balls,
Yep.
so many different situations.
Right.
And they can, but with using CTM and the guidelines, I think somewhere between 10 to 20 times less balls are needed to see to have a good grasp of it. Now, you still need to hit a lot of balls to develop your quality as far as your stroke and your swing and all that. But as far as knowing what you're doing and dealing with different situations, you can learn that in a year or two.
It is kind of
And
liberating too, right? To know that you have the tools as far as a player. It's empowering. Like, oh, you're going to give me this, a dropping ball, and I'm behind the baseline. I'll hit a lift and spin. Or you're going to give me the short ball. This is exactly what I waited for. It's above the net. I'm going to hit a power fade. So it is nice. I think it frees the player understanding like they feel empowered. Like I've got options. I've got the tools. I know what to do with this ball. There's a lot of, I mean, we see it. We've talked about it. You've worked with Olivia, one of the juniors we brought down to Atlanta, and she understands CTM and she'll salivate when she gets, for the most part, a mid-court ball. She knows how to attack and finish points at the net. And a lot of players don't feel that way. If you're a parent or a coach out there and your kids do not know how to finish points at the net, you're going to you want CTM to be a part of their curriculum or their.
good point to think along with that. Like I was I was speaking to a group up in New York about this, and one of the coaches was like, when he was talking about things about behind the baseline play, rallying, and then he talked about how it was so important for these players to get to the net, but everything between the net and the baseline, he was saying, well, you just got to find a way to get through there. You got to transition through. He
Yeah.
was acting like that was running across hot coals so that you could get to the net and actually do something. When you understand how to attack out of the midcourt, you realize, no, that's virtually the whole game. I mean, if you're going to be really good at something, I mean, what I was shocked at is it's even more important than serving. Now, serving is very important. There's no doubt. Serve and return, it's how you start the point. You got to be able to make your serves. You got to be able to hit your spots. But if you're going to be a maestro, if you're going to be something really special at one part of the game, the mid-court attack, the three types, I've isolated three types that I think are the most effective and best mid-court attacks. If you can master those off your forehand and your backhand, and you don't even have to master all three. Like you might have two that you use regularly for your backhand, and two of them that it might even be a different. I mean, there's some overlap because there's only three of them, but two out of the three for your backhand, two out of the three for your forehand, and you're armed for bear already. Now you have something for every situation, and if you can hit all three off both sides, well, that's just even better. It gives you more
Right.
options.
Right.
But it's even more important. I mean, think about it. What were paid when people were saying a big serve and a big forehand? What were they saying? What they were saying, and in code, without even knowing what they were saying, was hit a serve that elicits a mid-court attack, so that you can come in and hit a big forehand. Well, how do you hit a big forehand? Well, most likely, if you're going to hit a really big forehand, means you got to take the ball near the apex, up higher in the strike zone, and hit a power fade. And if you don't know how to hit a power fade, and the power fade makes no sense to you, and you don't understand the higher
Right.
contact for working off the inside, like I mean, firsthand, you really didn't have that when you were in college. You probably were a pretty good server. You probably earned some mid-court attack opportunities. And quite often, you probably just had to let the ball drop to your hitting zone and hit a good, strong power draw and try to work the point from there.
Right. Right. Yeah. If you don't know, if you're out there and you're watching or listening to this and you don't know how to hit the power fade, make sure you follow Chuck and John at CTM. It is a great shot. Chuck, let's this also was not on the agenda, but let's talk about Djokovic.
I love it. One of my favorite topics.
Let's talk about
Love the guy.
Djokovic. The guy is he's unbelievable. He's like defining time, what he does with his conditioning and his nutrition and everything. I mean, he's taken it up another notch. I thought Federer and Nadal did it, but Djokovic is taking it up another notch. Where do you see him in the next 2 to 3 years? How many more majors can this guy win?
Well, I mean, if he can stay healthy and continue to maintain a level, which I think he can, maintain the level he's at now, roughly, if he can stay healthy. Um, Now, I will say, I do think I've seen him lose a step, or a quarter step or something. He's lost a half step or something. And really, what I mean more than the coverage, I mean his ability, late in matches. Um, he's not as strong as he used to be. I mean, there was a time in his early to mid 30s where because I think he sort of peaked out right around there in those early 30s to where he looked stronger in the fifth set than he did in the first.
Yeah.
He's not like that anymore, but I think he is learning to hold he is learning to hold that good quality throughout the fifth set when he's forced to do it. um,
If he could stay healthy, and I think he's got it probably in the most important part, probably the two most important part of any player's game. He's got it in the between the ears, and he's got it in the heart. The guy's
well,
just
like
got a heart of a lion. Like,
now, like this last US Open, I think is a great example. I don't know all the stats and details, and so
you're talking about the
go ahead.
2023 US Open, right?
Right, right. So if they want to correct me, if I don't have every detail just right, feel free. I mean, but the point is, it looked to me, if I remember right, he didn't have to go. He was really able to conserve in how many sets he went throughout the tournament. I think he won most of them in straight sets. I think he got stretched out a little bit a couple times, which actually is not even a bad thing to get stretched out a little bit. If you go through the whole tournament in straight sets and then you get a tough one in the final, sometimes it can be a little unnerving. But even for a guy like that. But I
Yeah.
think he got stretched a couple times, but for the most part, I think he was winning. Now, if he ends up going, 4 and 5 sets and tiebreakers too often early in a major, then I
Yeah.
think I think we'll see him struggle a little bit on those finals. But to face it, I mean, at that point, just making finals at this point in his career is incredible. I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
I mean, if he didn't win another major, but he made 4 or 5 more finals, just think how impressive that would be in the context of what he's doing. And I also like to always mention he could very easily have 3 more majors. I mean, he's even though he's got he's got 2 more than anybody else on the male side, he could very well have 5 more. I mean, because he got booted out of that one U.S. Open that he was a strong favorite to win. He didn't get allowed to play in one. and then the Australian Open that he was a strong, strong favorite to win. And Nadal won that one. So if Djokovic had won that, Nadal would only have 21.
Yep.
So
Yep.
his gap would be even larger.
So
And
let's think about what Djokovic does on the court and how he relates to CTM. And I tell this to the kids I work with. I tell them, I'm like, really anybody can rally from behind the baseline. They can be consistent and be steady. But what Djokovic does is he can do that. But then he does have this mid-court attack where he can attack and put pressure. And I think that's the one shot that's missing from a lot of people's games. Like he knows, like I cannot be out here and have consistent 20, 30 ball rallies and try to win a major. He knows that sometimes he has to shorten up points. So when that opportunity presents itself, he's going to move forward and apply pressure. Would you agree? Like that's why I struggle watching guys like Medvedev, because he's content being, 6 to 10 feet behind the baseline and try to wear players down. But I think that's hard to do in a major over 2 weeks to play that style in the heat in some instances and try to win a grand slam. I think it's just too challenging.
Well, if it may sound a little scary, but I think Djokovic could actually, as great as he is, and don't get me wrong, I think he's the best in history. I mean, I think it's hands down. I don't think really, you can have favorite players. If you love Federer and you like to watch him hit the ball, I understand that. The guy is beautiful on the court and won a lot of matches. But I don't think any of these guys can hold a candle to the career Djokovic has had because he cut that
Right.
whole career right through those guys. That being said, I know it sounds crazy, but I really think he could be substantially better if he would improve his midcourt game. If you look at Djokovic, the thing I don't like about his midcourt attack game is he primarily goes with what we call the fourth dagger, you know, and he uses it more as a drive, a draw drive. So
Yeah.
he's mainly hitting a dropping ball for a heavy draw.
Mhm.
And I think that's the weakest of the three attacks. I think is the toughest one I think it's the toughest one to execute and be consistent with. And I think that's why occasionally he does tend to struggle a little bit in the midcourt attack area.
So you're saying you'd
Uh,
like to see him take it more at the apex and fade it, get to the inside of the ball and
and the beauty is he has the shot. So I'm not like I'm saying, oh yeah, I need to teach him that shot. No, I've seen him in rare instances where he gets a ball up high and he gets forced to do it, so to speak. And his forehand power fade drive
Yeah.
is impeccable,
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
But if he would do a little more, match planning to take advantage of that, because he gets the opportunities where he could be 2 or 3 steps net closer to the net, take the ball higher, and hit more aggressively. But he's one of those players, maybe a little bit like you were when you were playing in college, where you had to sit back, let the ball drop down into your hitting zone a little more, and try to work a power drive.
Right.
And then you start having to modulate your power a little because you can't just swing away, and there's just a lot more finesse to that you don't really need to have in
Yep.
those situations.
No, good point.
And then the other thing would be is I think that he tends to go with too much of a pure drop shot where the ball, flies high and then drops in. We're big fans of the third dagger where Alcaraz uses the third dagger quite a bit, where you hit the low slice,
Yeah.
you hit it short, you hit it soft, but you don't hang the ball up in the air. It looks like any other slice. It just sort of dies and usually goes off on an angle.
Right.
And has and and if you notice, I mean, Djokovic does use that shot. He has the shot. He could do it. But he tends to go with a full-on drop shot, which I don't think is near as good a option.
Right.
So it's hard to imagine that, here it is, what I believe is the most important part of the game that he has to. It's more tactical and game planning, but if and we're talking to some people that have access to Djokovic, and so we're trying to get word to him a little bit on some things that tactically, some adjustments that I think he could just be untouchable.
Right. Interesting. All right. So last topic, the book, Modern Tennis Instruction. Yeah, let's see the cover.
Here's the front and the back. or one of the versions. I think this is very close to the final version here. Might not be the final. Uh, this is one of the like a manuscript type version that they printed out for us.
Tell us about that
Went in
gal.
there.
Tell us about that gal that's loading and catching some air off the forehand.
Yeah, that's Bessie Moore there. And that picture doesn't even do her justice. There's one inside the book that shows she looks to be 2 to 3 feet vertically in the air when she hits that ball. Here she is in a long dress and everything, and it's just amazing the way she's risen up. Now, what you also notice, remember how we talked about having the racket tip higher than the hand?
Yes.
She's very near contact in that picture, by the way. That's not like way through the follow through. She's that's one thing that's a little misleading about the picture because you can see Djokovic he's well into his follow through there. On the other hand, she's not. I think in this picture she had contacted the ball pretty close to that. So that was a good example of
Looks like she had a
take,
semi-open stance too,
yeah.
potentially. Yeah,
But
so
here's the book. A little closer look at the book, an actual version of the book right here.
tell me, there's been a lot of books on on instruction, drills. What's the premise of modern tennis instruction? What's the premise behind it? What was the goal or the objective behind this book?
Well, the biggest thing we need to give John Carpenter a shout out. He did 18 years of research. Um, really looked into everything he could find internationally and just about everything, any book ever written within the United States, because it's focused on the United States tennis instruction. And I think some of the points he seeks to make in there is he wanted to show how what we call modern tennis with open stances and hitting across the ball. I think those are two of the main characteristics that you see out of modern tennis. You can contrast that with traditional tennis, which is more sideways stance or square stance and hitting linear, trying to hit linear out down the target line. That's sort of your main contrasting efforts there. He's trying to show, and he did show very, very well. He had excellent documentation. Even back in the 1800s, they were already playing. In fact, back in the early turn of the century, 1800, the early 1900s, Western grips, open stance, and hitting across the ball dominated the game. It wasn't until later on that I think what the book sort of deduces is that what's his name in the 30s, 29, 30, 20s and 30s there, Bill Tilden.
I was gonna say, that's what I was gonna say. Yeah,
Yeah, I was hoping you'd help me out there because I'm always horrible with names.
yeah,
Uh, but Bill Tilden, his funny thing is he played extremely modern. Here's a guy
yes.
with one of the most modern games. He's probably one of the best modern players. But oddly enough, he bought into the British model of instruction. And the British model, which was largely based on cricket, maybe some baseball influence, but I think it was largely cricket from the British, and they were teaching the sideways stance and the linear swings. That was their perspective on the game, and they felt like that was the best way to teach beginners. Of course, we saw what happened to the British. They didn't have any Wimbledon winners and major winners for the next 50 years because a lot of people think it's because that instruction was so limiting. And that's why even people like you can say, okay, well, they had Andy Murray. Well, he went to the Spanish and trained
Right. Yeah.
in modern tennis. So if he had never gone down to Spain, he would probably he probably wouldn't have done as good as Tim Hinman. Tim Hinman did awfully well considering the model he was trying to train under.
Yeah.
But even Tim Hinman played a version of modern tennis. You can't swing that fast without working across the ball, right? You just can't do it. So the book does a great job of talking about how modern tennis has been a big part of John really did a great job of tying that. And then because he invited me to write chapters 5 and 6 on actual. He wanted some actual instruction in his book to go along with all that history, and he tied the history into what I was doing in the instruction and showed how it was very historically relevant.
Yep.
Um, And it was sort of interesting because I didn't know that when I developed CTM and I developed my style. I didn't know John. I didn't know I wasn't up on all that historical context. And that's why John actually, chose me as the most innovative instructor. The fact that I was historically accurate with what I was doing based on his history, as well as some of the things I had added to the training to bring a little more clarity and high resolution. So he named me the most innovative instructor that he could find, and decided to use my work as the basis of the instruction for his book, and then tied the history in to the things that I was doing.
That's pretty special because there's a lot of acclaimed tennis instructors that are mentioned in the book. I mean, he's going back a lot of years. I mean, I remember him. He sent me some excerpts of the book, and I kind of read through them. And I remember him talking about there was a gentleman, or was a woman, wasn't she an instructor in San Francisco and created all these top players that played internationally and became world champions? Like, I mean, this is going back
Oh yeah,
a
yeah. This is
lot of years.
The Golden Gate Tennis Club, I believe it
The
was.
Golden Gate Tennis Club, and these kids are phenoms coming out of this area. And it's like, what are they doing? Well, she was teaching, I think it was a female, correct?
I think it was a male and a female, but
Yeah.
and
Yeah, but they're just
John,
teaching this modern game and how these kids are free and they know how to play the game and, open stance. And so it's fascinating if you're a tennis enthusiast and you want to learn about how instruction has evolved. And believe it or not, this modern method has been around for a long time. And American tennis kind of got away from it, like you talked about with Tilden and getting linear and closing things up. And it inhibits the players. So it's a fascinating, I can't wait to get it. I know, hopefully I'll be, I think I think I sent my deposit in. So I get one of the issues that comes up.
yeah,
So
you
I'm pretty
got your
excited
books
about that.
coming your way soon. Now, most of us have heard the term logical fallacy. I think that a lot of what Tilden and the British did was what we might consider a logical fallacy. They knew that no pros played that way, but they thought this is a good way to simplify the game for beginners. They thought they were doing beginners a favor and making the game easier. So they had the best of intentions, I believe. I don't think they were trying to mess everybody up. Um, they thought they had come up with a simplified version as a way to introduce the game. I think what they missed, though, is things I forget the exact name of it, but I always call it the first learn principle, where the first time you learn something, it sort of sticks with you, and you tend to revert back to it in times of stress and that kind of thing. And so if you learn this, even if it was an easier version, let's say they even are right. I don't think they're right because I don't think it's an easier way to learn. Is the ironic thing. But even if it was, if you're a really high level player and you get under pressure and you revert back to this traditional form of tennis that you should have just been for beginners, and uh, that's going to be bad for your game if you do that in times of pressure and stress. So odd thing is that learning modern with the open stance and swinging across the ball, it's actually the easiest way to play the game. It's the easiest way to learn the game. And it makes a lot of sense to get your first principles correct so that under times of stress, you go right back to the basics of how to do it correctly, not some dumbed down version. Now, here's the real also ironic part is they went back and they made this very clearly. If you look at history, I think it was pretty darn clear that the idea was to simplify it for beginners. But somehow, Vic Braden and some of the people who came along tried to continue to push that for people who were advancing players. And so they continued to have players, it's sort of like, okay, let's buy, even if you buy in and you give into the idea that maybe it was a good beginner idea, where do you change? Where do you make the transition? Well, Vic
Right.
Braden sort of had, some of his strike. I mean, I love what Vic did for the game, growing the game. Wonderful guy, high energy. I'm not trying to spoil his legacy. I knew Vic also. We talked about a few things. In fact, I even talked to him about changing a few things. I suggested to him that he didn't want it to be his legacy, hitting linear through 5 balls down the target line. I said, "Come on, Vic, you don't want that to be your legacy, And he
Yeah.
goes, "Well, you know, we still see it that way or something, and it's I guess so not only do people revert back to it in stress, but people don't know when to get away from it. It's sort of like they get captured into that traditional model. And a lot of people, that I think that's why we see so many people stuck at 3-5 and low 4-0, because they learned traditional tennis. They never learned to transition out of it. It's hard to transition out of it. It takes
Yep.
really good coaching to get out of it. So you see a real glut of players at 3-5 and 4-0 for that reason. We find, like with our players we work with, we find that they blow right through 4-0 with no problem, hit 4-5, and then so they get more up to the 5-0, 4-5, 5-0 level before they start. Then it becomes you know, a talent and physical fitness level, because now it really pretty much depends on just how good you are, right? It's not about the strokes anymore so much. It's like, how good can you move? How good can you cover the court? How good of decisions you can make?
I think
It's
I'm
not a
gonna
hitting
do
game.
I think I'm gonna do a video on put a myth on why you don't want to hit 5 balls in a row. And it comes back to CTM, right? We're talking about that you don't want to spoil the swing. And so I could easily do a video on it, because think about it. So when you make contact with the ball, right?
Right.
Wherever that racket angle is facing, that's pretty much where the ball's going to go. So if we're going to hit a fade, the hand is leading, the racket head is trailing, correct? If we're going to hit a fade, we're going to go inside out with the ball. Now, if you're going to hit 5 in a row, how do you keep that racket angle for 5 continuous balls? You know what I mean? Like, it's going to change, right? Because if we're truly hitting like in a circular motion or rotating, then that racket head will eventually, the racket head will get in front of the hand, right? But according
Right.
to Braden, if you're hitting 5 balls in a row, then that is a linear stroke, and the racket face would have to be square, correct? For 5 balls.
Right. I mean, it's all
We talk
physically
about it.
impossible, number one. So you're
Yeah,
trying to do this thing that you can't even do with the human body.
right. So it's bad. That's just, so if someone's trying to do that, you want to talk about maybe why people are having tennis elbow, or having issues with shoulders, or the ball, like have no control or feel. It's because of things like that. And I'm not saying I'm not guilty of maybe giving some misinformation. I've been teaching for over 30 years. I probably have given some bad tips in the day. So I'm not saying like I'm any saint, but this is
Well,
the
let's touch on a little one right there, because I know you probably brought that mainly from Oscar and MTM, which is the big idea. It's not too bad that the racket face direction is where the ball's going to go in general to a certain extent. But what we also really teach in CTM at a higher resolution is how much we get a really good lockup. They say it's only 3 to 5 milliseconds, and that's true. But what they don't tell you in most cases is 3 to 5 milliseconds is about 3 to 5 inches of carry. Now, think about what you can do, how much you can carry the ball for 3 to 5 inches. You can carry it cross court. So even though you may come into contact with your racket face open to the side, like an inside out,
Mhm.
if your intent is to drag that ball over cross court, see, we want to make sure that people understand that, inside out, while that is the primary place you see people hit a fade, you can take that fade and drag that ball right across and hit it
Right.
cross court as well, or
That's a,
inside in.
that's a great point. It's not, the ball is not moving linearly. It's tailing, right? It's fading. So
Right.
I mean, I think the intent is to get it to the corner, right? Like the power fade, let's say we're going to put it to the opponent's backhand on the ad side. But if you shape it properly, if you can make it move, you can make it move off the court even more. If you,
Well, that's what our goal is, to take it outside the corner. We
yes,
call it we have a little side pet name for it. We call it out the side door.
yep,
We try to take the power fades and shape fades out the side door. We
yeah,
don't even want it to stay within the confines of the back
no,
corners.
no,
We
we
want
haven't
to
even
take it
talked
out
about
sooner.
Yeah, we haven't even gotten into the geometry of the court yet. And
Right.
we're actually,
And
that'll be our
which is
next.
another important part of the fade and the
Yes.
draw, because that is a great way to expand the geometry of the court when you know how to fade and draw.
Yep. Well,
When you
that,
don't,
I think we have content for another Zoom, another podcast, Chuck. But I think I'm going to wrap it up right here.
okay. I
Any
would like to see you get one with John where he can talk a little bit more about the history and the names if you find that,
Let's get
really
Johnny
interesting.
on. Let's
Yeah,
get
you and
you and
John get in there, and or I can even be there with John, but allow him to do most of the talking on the history because he's so much better on the names and the dates and the the coaches' names, the players' names. He's really good on those details. I sort of have the general idea, I'm more
right.
interested in the techniques and the details. He's more interested in the actual history
We'll do that.
and
We'll get one on for John. We'll get John. We'll bring him on solo, he and I.
yeah.
And only if he wears a cowboy hat though.
I don't know if he has one. He needs to show he's sort of bald headed. I think he needs that chrome dome. So,
Oh, it's great, Chuck.
all right.
Thanks so much again for your time and expertise. It's always great doing this. Love having you on the channel.
Uh, we
We'll catch
always
up.
love to work with Topspin Tennis. I think we have a really good association. I love how you're so kind to include us in a lot of your videos, some of the things that you see from us, and we're a big supporter of Topspin Tennis and what you're doing, and the great players that you're developing up there.
Yeah, thank you. They love coming down. We can't wait to get back down to Atlanta again and train with you guys. So, and your hospitality. You got a wonderful household and a beautiful wife. So, hey, thanks again. And thanks
Okay.
everybody for watching. So make sure we go visit CTM Congruent Tennis. It's congruenttennis.com. Is that correct?
Yep. That's
Congruent.
we got two sites. We got the congruenttennis.com, which has a lot of good articles and a lot of stuff to read on fade and draw, shot matching. We could talk more about shot matching sometime. We can talk more about smart targets sometime. A lot of that is covered on congruenttennis.com, but we also have a Facebook site, which is Advanced Tennis Foundation. So if you go on there, there's a couple other advanced tennises, but if you look for Advanced Tennis Foundation on Facebook, we've got like over like 12,000 international members, mostly coaches, lots of coaches, grassroots coaches, even a lot of high level coaches, even have a few pro players have signed up. Several pro players are actually on our site now, and got like 12,000 people. Not everybody's all that active, but a lot of people are reading. Our posts are going out to a lot of things, and there's a lot of good discussion and a lot of good debate. So if you're a Facebook person, advanced, come in. And we have everybody join. We do ask that you ask to join, but when you do, everybody's approved.
A lot of
So
good content, a lot of good information there. And then the book, Chuck, real quick, where do they find the book if they want to order the book when it comes out?
John's right now working real hard to make it available on a couple different sites. Congruenttennis.com is probably the first and best place. If
Yep.
you come on Advanced Tennis Foundation and message me or John, we can work with you there directly through messages, and we'll make that information available more and more. Right now, we still don't have the actual. I mean, they should be coming out in about 20 days, but as far as actually delivered, but we've been taking a lot of pre-orders. I mean, price on the book is $99, but for pre-order right now, we're selling for 75 on the pre-order. And these are beautiful hardback. It's like, I'm trying to think. I think it's 300 something pages, hardback, beautiful book, and they're numbered collectors. 1 through 500. We did a limited edition run of 500. So if you're interested in getting a collector edition of the 500 first hardback, and if the pre-sale price is only $75 plus shipping.
I ordered mine, so make sure you guys either congruenttennis.com or go to Advanced Tennis Foundation on Facebook and make sure you message Chuck. So Chuck, fantastic. Thank you so much, and we'll talk soon.
All right, it's a pleasure as always. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. You know that I have a Topspin newsletter, and if you subscribe to it, you're going to get my next gen forehand blueprints. Click the link below, throw in your email address, you get access to the newsletter, which I send out every month, and you're going to get the next gen forehand blueprint. 10 pages of quality information. Enjoy.